Well, hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to Nature Connects. Nature Connects is TNC in Massachusetts webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, influencers, and our partners from New England and around the world. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Deb Markowitz, the State Director of the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, and your host. Here at the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, we're dedicated to creating a healthier world for all. We work locally and globally using innovative science and scalable, long-lasting solutions to tackle the most complex environmental challenges facing our warming planet. We know that what we do here in Massachusetts to protect nature will mean a better future for people and for the planet. We have an exciting program for you today. We're going to visit a few clips from the PBS documentary Earth Emergency, which premiered earlier this year to educate audiences about the inner workings of climate change. Then we're going to have a discussion with one of the filmmakers, Bonnie Waltch, who you see here, as well as science advisor to the film and former trustee to our chapter, Dr. Bill Moomaw. Bill and Bonnie are going to talk about the vision behind the film, some of the science it aims to communicate, and how we here in Massachusetts and around the world can prevent and adapt to the worst impacts of climate change. Before we dive into today's program, I wanted to share a little bit about our guests. Bonnie Waltch is the award-winning senior producer and writer of the one-hour international broadcast documentary, Earth Emergency, and a series of 5 short films, Climate Emergency, Feedback Loops. She's been involved in numerous PBS science series, as well as programs for the Discovery Channel and Animal Planet. She directed and wrote Super Reefs, The Future of Coral, a 5-minute film for Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and she's produced exhibit media for museums around the United States. Bonnie's currently developing a film project about the bipolar spectrum based on the book Brainstorm, From Broken to Blessed on the Bipolar Spectrum. She has a degree in semiotics from Brown University. Bill Moomaw is a professor emeritus at Tufts University and a distinguished visiting scientist at Woodville Climate Research Center, as well as a former trustee for the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts and a frequent presenter on our webinar series. He holds a PhD from MIT and previously taught chemistry and was the director of environmental studies at Williams College. He's a physical chemist who helped develop the first ozone layer protection legislation while working for the United States Senate. And he's been a lead author of 5 intergovernmental panel on climate change reports, including the 2007 report that shared the Nobel Peace Prize. He's published extensively on technical solutions to reduce climate-altering emissions, and he's currently working internationally and nationally to identify and implement natural climate solutions that accumulate additional carbon out of the atmosphere in forests, wetlands, and soils. You're going to have an opportunity to ask questions to Bonnie and Bill. If you have a question that you think of during their presentation, please enter it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, not the chat, the Q&A box. And after their presentation, we'll have a conversation and I'll bring them your questions. So thank you so much. And Bonnie, it is time for you.
Hi, Deb. Thanks so much. I'm the senior producer and writer of this series of 5 short films called Climate Emergency Feedback Loops and the one-hour broadcast version called Earth Emergency. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about the film project, and then I'm going to show a very short clip and then introduce Bill. The 3 members of our film team are producer Barry Hershey and director and co-writer Susan Gray. And the 3 of us met with Bill Moomaw at the very start of our project when we were trying to figure out what stories to tell. And Bill advised us on current research around feedback loops and suggested stories to pursue around forests, permafrost, the atmosphere, and the poles. And he also led us to many of the scientists that are featured in the films, 6 of whom are from what's now the Woodwell Climate Research Center in Woods Hole, Mass., and to George Woodwell himself, who you'll see in the upcoming clip and film. We launched the films in January 2021 with a virtual panel that included the Dalai Lama, Greta Thunberg, Sue Natali, who's in the permafrost film, and Bill. And we had nearly 1 million people attending from around the world. Shortly after that, we cut a 1-hour broadcast film from the 5 shorts called Earth Emergency. And this has been sold to TV markets around the world. And as Deb said, has aired on PBS twice since December. Since then, we've been doing a lot of outreach with the films. We've had virtual screenings and events with places like the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, the Massachusetts State Legislature, the UK Parliament, and by invitation of now King Charles for his Terracotta Carta Strategic Markets Initiative at COP26 in Glasgow. Our mission right now is to make the short films accessible for teaching about climate feedback loops around the world. So they're posted for free to stream on our website, and they're captioned in soon to be 27 languages. We also have a state standard science curriculum for grades 6 through 12 and discussion guides. So we're really encouraging their use for education globally. So now I'm going to show a 2.5-minute clip explaining what feedback loops are for those of you who may not be sure, and then I'll introduce Bill. So let me share my screen. Okay, here we go.
But it's more than our emissions heating the globe. Something else is at work here. The rising temperatures are setting in motion Earth's own natural warming mechanisms that then feed upon themselves. George Woodwell, a distinguished scientist and a lion of the environmental movement, has been sounding the alarm about them for the past 50 years. In a 1989 Scientific American article, he wrote that warming caused by human activity, rapid now, may become even more rapid as a result of the warming itself.
A feedback that everybody is familiar with is an audio feedback, where if you put a microphone too close to a speaker, you get this terrible high-pitched screaming. And that happens because the sound comes out of the speaker and it goes back into the microphone. That's called a positive feedback because it amplifies the loop.
Instead of the guitar, emissions from fossil fuels are the input which add heat-trapping gases to the atmosphere, raising Earth's temperature and setting in motion self-perpetuating warming loops. Warming as a result of the warming itself. That ever-growing screeching noise is an apt analogy for the damage that human-caused feedback loops are wreaking on the planet. Scientists have identified dozens of feedback loops already in motion. It's imperative that we understand them if we're going to solve the climate crisis. As the climate warms, forests, once removers of carbon, release it back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, or CO2. Frozen ground in the northern hemisphere thaws and emits CO2 and methane. These are the kinds of feedback loops that lead to further warming, triggering the release of even more heat-trapping gases and raising the temperature even higher. In this series, we will highlight 4 of the major feedback loops impacting climate: the melting of sea ice in the Arctic Ocean, increased drought and fires in the world's forests, the decay of organic matter from permafrost thaw in the northern hemisphere, and disruptions to the jet stream and our global weather. Each amplifies warming, and combined, they are spinning out of control.
Okay, so that's a little clip from our introduction film about what feedback loops are. So now I'm going to hand it over to Bill, who's going to introduce the forest film.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bonnie, and thank you very much, Deb, for the for TNC sponsoring this event. feedback loops are, as you saw in that little short clip there, rather formidable, and they have this property that we're used to thinking if I push on something, it'll move a certain distance. If I push twice as hard, it'll move twice as far. Well, what's saying here is that second push actually is equivalent to a third push. It adds more to it, the amplifying feedbacks. In the case of forests play an incredibly important role in determining the temperature of the planet. Forests absorb approximately 30% of all the fossil fuel emissions that we put into the atmosphere every year. In other words, there'd be that much more carbon dioxide from our fossil fuels and deforestation and other things than there is. And the ocean removes another 25%. So the increase in the atmosphere is less than half of what we do, what we put in. And so that's a benefit we're getting from the natural world. The problem is, as the Earth warms, instead of having these just these beneficial aspects of forests, we start seeing a situation in which the forests begin releasing more carbon dioxide. There's a lot of carbon stored in the soils. There are bacteria that break it down. When it's warmer, they break it down faster. And so they're putting more into the atmosphere. And so we have forests in a really critical juncture between being our great savior and potentially amplifying climate change. Just a couple of things about forests. If you see the scene behind me, this is taken in a picture taken in Northwest Massachusetts. Beautiful vista. But this was all forest 40 years ago. And 40 years later, this is all that's grown back. A few little birch trees and some very low shrubby things. In the distance, you can see real forests that are still standing. And those real forests are accumulating carbon out of the atmosphere. And they're accumulating much more than this very young, just beginning forest, which is already 40 years old. So we have to have more forests with larger trees that are continuing to grow. And that's a hugely important part of the solution. Instead, we of course are deforesting and degrading forests all over the world. And we hear a lot about the tropics, but in fact, the United States harvests more forests than any other country on earth. So we have to look at our own behavior as well. So with that as background, oh, by the way, let me just say a note of appreciation about George Woodwell, absolutely remarkable scientist. And he's very senior now, but he's still very active. And his insights have been shaping the scientific debate, as you heard, for more than 50 years. That's quite a record. So why don't we turn to the film, and then we'll have some commentary, brief commentary at the end, and go into the questions.
Great. I will share the film, and it runs about 14 minutes, just so you know.
"20 years ago, I started photographing our oldest trees. They can be 4,000 years old. Some are dying from disease, insects, lack of rain, warming temperatures. Never did I realize that within my lifetime I would be recording their deaths.
It's really astonishing in a forest the extent to which the trees produce a canopy that is fairly uniform, fairly dense. they parcel out the space up there among themselves as though they had decided ahead of time, you get this space and I get this space. They don't really think of it that way, but that's the way it works out.
Trees are miraculous in other ways too. As they reach out with their leaves and branches, they play a vital role in the health of the planet. Through photosynthesis, they help regulate Earth's temperature by pulling carbon dioxide, a powerful heat-trapping gas, from the atmosphere and emitting oxygen. Since carbon dioxide warms the atmosphere, by removing it and storing much of the carbon safely away in their branches, trunks, leaves, roots, and soils, forests help cool the Earth. In fact, every year, terrestrial ecosystems remove about 30% of fossil fuel emissions, and forests are responsible for most of that. But that percentage is decreasing as emissions increase, steadily raising Earth's temperature and threatening forests' ability to offset the warming.
We have warmed the Earth by a full degree and a little more, and forests are suffering increased hazards of fire as they get warm and dry, increased hazards of disease as they become vulnerable to insects, and dying as a result.
As trees die, they become part of a dangerous feedback loop kicked off by the warming. As the temperature rises, the climate becomes hotter and drier, and they fall prey to drought, fire, and insects. With fewer trees left, more heat-trapping gas remains in the atmosphere, raising the temperature higher, resulting in even more dieback. As trees burn and decay, the carbon they've locked away during their lifetime, what scientists call a carbon sink, is released back into the air.
It's entirely possible we reach a point where we're killing off forests much more rapidly than carbon can be fixed by forests. The net result then is to produce a feedback that's lethal.
Today, we have a choice. Allow trees to do their job and cool the planet, or jeopardize the forests we have. That's the path we're on right now. How we protect and manage forests will play a large role in determining our future. When it comes to global warming, 3 major forests matter the most: the tropical, the boreal, and the temperate. No forest is more critical for cooling the planet than the Amazon. Spanning more than 2 million square miles across 9 countries, this tropical forest has been storing carbon for millennia. Yet it is dangerously close to releasing more carbon than it absorbs. Mike Coe is the director of the Tropics program at the Woodwell Climate Research Center. For over 20 years, he's studied how deforestation in the Amazon rainforest affects the local climate and environment.
Tropical rainforests probably account for about 15 to 20% of all the terrestrial carbon sink, and the Amazon's half of that. So we're talking about a significant fraction of our annual emissions are being taken up by the Amazon forest.
But in the last 50 years, nearly 20% of this forest has been lost, mostly to slash and burn land clearing, triggering fires, insects, and tree dieback. This not only releases the carbon stored there, it jeopardizes an important cooling function of the Amazon rainforest. During transpiration, roots pull water out of the ground and release it as water vapor through tiny holes in the tree's leaves, creating a cooling effect on the surrounding air. In the Amazon, transpiration can cool the region by as much as 10 degrees Fahrenheit.
When we lose trees in the Amazon, when we cut them down, what we're doing is we're shutting off that transpiration. So what you get is a drier climate. And the more you deforest, the drier it gets.
Over the past 2 decades, the dry season has extended several weeks, stressing trees even more and creating an ideal environment for fires to spread.
During extreme droughts, a huge amount of the forest burns. That turns the forest that year from a net sink to a net source of carbon. And we can do the math. If that happens 5 times in a decade, This forest is now a source.
Today, tropical forests are absorbing 1/3 less carbon than they did in the 1990s. Scientists predict that with the loss of so many trees, the Amazon could flip to emitting more carbon than it stores as soon as the next decade.
You can imagine that the climate's changing a little bit and everything looks just fine. But then one day, it changes just enough that the whole system flips over. You know, it's the classic frog in the water that you heat up. The frog's not noticing anything until it's way too late.
The next major forest at risk of tipping from a carbon sink to a carbon source is the boreal, encircling the North Pole through Siberia and North America. The largest forested region in the world, this vast coniferous expanse, stores an estimated 2/3 of all forest carbon, most of it locked away in frozen plant and animal remains deep in the ground. But that's changing. As with tropical forests, the warmer, drier climate here is making the trees more vulnerable to disease, insects, and fire. Brendan Rogers has been studying how boreal forests respond to climate change for the past decade.
Wildfires are getting worse across the boreal zone. We're seeing more and more large fire seasons, record-breaking fire seasons every year.
Unlike in tropical forests, the fires here strip off the insulating ground cover, preventing it from building up in between the frequent burns. Without this protective layer, fires reach further and further down, burning the organic matter stored in the soil.
About 75 to 90% of all the carbon stored in these forests is underground. And that is actually the majority of the carbon that's getting released from these fires.
The fires kick off a feedback loop, triggered by warming in the boreal zone. More fires burn carbon deeper down in the soil, releasing carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere, heat-trapping gases that make the climate hotter and drier, leading to more wildfires. Like the Amazon, the boreal forest is going to switch from a carbon sink to a carbon source. Scientists don't know exactly when, but predict that at the current rate, it will happen by the end of the century, crossing a tipping point that the forest can no longer recover from.
We're seeing rapid change now, so rapid that the system is essentially not used to it. And the scary thing is not knowing where that tipping point is.
The temperate forest makes up only 1/4 of the world's forests, but it's our best hope, since the tropical and boreal forests are on the brink of becoming emitters of carbon. Once cleared for agriculture, many temperate forests in the US and Europe have made a comeback in recent decades. But in the southeastern US, old forests are being cut down by the wood pellet industry for burning, releasing decades of stored carbon back into the air. Even though these forests are being replanted, when it comes to offsetting global warming, old and young forests are not equal. Beverly Law has been measuring the exchange of both carbon dioxide and water between our forests and our atmosphere for the last 25 years. She works at 2 long-term testing sites that are part of a global network of more than 500.
An older forest has a lot of carbon stored compared to a younger forest. In a young forest ecosystem, there aren't that many trees there, and they're not taking up much carbon from the atmosphere.
Old-growth forests in the Pacific Northwest store huge amounts of carbon. Not only are they thriving in the wetter and cooler climate, these forests will be less vulnerable to climate change over the next 30 years compared to other forests in the western U.S.
If I were to try and mitigate climate change, the best strategy is when you have forests that have low vulnerability to climate change in the future, and they store a lot of carbon already, is keep those forests like they are, preserve them.
But unfortunately, these hardy carbon-rich trees have been prized by loggers for centuries. Redwoods that once towered over the Pacific coast are now mostly gone. When a tree is logged, 1/2 to 2/3 of the carbon it stores is released through decay or burning of the unused branches, leaves, and roots, as well as from the surrounding soil. Today, 17% of global carbon emissions each year can be attributed to logging and burning wood pellets for bioenergy.
In Oregon, of all the forest that was harvested over the past 100 years, 65% of that carbon has gone back to the atmosphere. This is just the wrong time for that in terms of climate.
The warming atmosphere poses another kind of threat. Unable to survive the higher temperatures, many forest species are migrating north to cooler climates. But not all species can do this, and it takes time, which is in short supply. With the clock ticking, it comes down to how we manage temperate forests. Use them for commercial purposes, or keep them intact to cool the planet. While human activity has kicked off natural warming loops, human ingenuity could reverse their direction, turning them into cooling feedbacks instead. It would mean protecting and expanding forests, preserving marshes, grasslands, and all natural habitats. Using agricultural practices that store carbon instead of releasing it, and letting trees and plants do their job of taking carbon out of the air. This would lower Earth's temperature and kick in a self-perpetuating cooling feedback loop. George Woodwell was an early pioneer warning about fossil fuel use, setting off warming feedback loops 5 decades ago. He's convinced the solution lies with nature's own ability to cool the planet.
We can store carbon in life. If we want to be optimistic, we have to be very progressive in our transition away from fossil fuels and into a new green world. But it takes imagination, interest, and a recognition of the reality of an Earth that is failing at the moment. We can't allow it to be too late.
Well, there you have it. And the story is I just think that Bonnie and her team did a wonderful job of using the scientific expertise and the incredible photography, videography, and the great animations to really make the point as to what a feedback loop is, and not just in general terms, but in this case of forests, that we are actually feeding it in the wrong direction. And the good news that gives hope is, were we to reverse that and allow more forests to grow, we would start a feedback in the other direction that would amplify, it would remove more carbon dioxide, that would lower the temperature, that would cause the temperature to drop further because we don't then grow more trees and remove more carbon dioxide. So that's the, if you like, the benign feedback loop that's amplifying the cooling rather than the current one, which is harvesting too much, burning too much, and making the problem worse.
I have to say, this was really an incredible film, really moving and disturbing. And it reminds me of something that Bill has said before when we were talking about, isn't there a technology out there that's being developed to draw carbon out of the atmosphere? And Bill, what you always say is, technology, we already have it. It's called trees, right? And actually wetlands, there's blue carbon too, how we, our oceans, we can create these carbon sinks using nature-based solutions. And that's, of course, what the Nature Conservancy is all about. We have a whole group of scientists really looking at best practices. Here in Massachusetts, we have the Family Forest Carbon Program. So if any of you have a forest that you want to make sure it's doing its best to draw carbon out of the atmosphere, let us know. We can, we have a guidebook on how to manage your forest. There's, this is a really cool new program. I don't know if there's any additional comments that you all want to make before we move into the question and answer part of this. And also to our viewers, please do put any questions you have in the Q&A box and I'll try to get to them.
I'd just like to make a plug for the rest of the series because we also have, we have a total of 5 of these short films. So if it's okay, I'll put the link to our website in the chat so anyone can go and watch the whole series if they want. All the films are between 8 and 14 minutes. This is the longest one.
So Bonnie, this is so impressive. I just was personally curious to start us off about, first of all, your career. What led you to filmmaking and what inspired you and your co-producer, Susan Gray, to make this film series?
Well, let's see. I really got interested in film in college and started working right after college. I moved out to LA to start my career and ended up working on National Geographic television specials.
Oh, how lucky is that?
And then I ended up back in Boston where I grew up because of all the science documentary work being done here in the, in the 80s, all the WGBH productions and all the offshoots from Nova, who started production companies. And so I had quite a career hopping from one PBS science film to the next.
That's great.
So that's what my trajectory was.
So the natural world has always been a passion, it sounds like. And
yeah.
Why this film?
Well, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, I have to say, for this film. I freelance a lot for a local production company called Northern Light Productions. And I was working there along with Susan Gray when we were approached to do this film by producer Barry Hershey, who had this idea to do some kind of film project around climate change, feedback loops. And so I got pulled onto it because of my background in science film. So Susan and I were tasked with working on this project, and it was fabulous. It was thoroughly depressing as I started doing the research and learning about all these feedback loops and not sleeping at night. And but I'd been working a lot on museum work, like in history and a little bit of science, but I was really so happy to be back on a science film project, even though the topic is depressing, but it's also so important to educate people about. So
it really is important to get the word out. And, I found it moving and disturbing, of course, which is probably the goal. Was there a main message you were hoping to get across to the audiences from these sets, from the whole set of films, this one included?
Yeah. Well, we just really wanted to educate the public. That was the goal. And we wanted to do it, as Greta Thunberg always says, listen to the scientists. Right. So we wanted to go right to the scientists and have them talk about it. And we didn't want to make anything, that would be seen as political or biased, or we just wanted to tell about the science of feedback loops. So that was our approach. And that's how we went about it. And as I said, Bill was a huge help and steered us to all the people, most of the people in the films. And, was a great advisor. He screened our cuts. He's in outreach with us. So he's really part of the team.
That's really good. One of the things that Bill brings, and not to make you continuously blush, but he was on our board of trustees for a long time, so I know pretty well, is, this science can be really complicated. And of course, there's a whole industry of misinformation, around climate science. And one of the things this film does, and I can see Bill's influence, is makes it really accessible to somebody with not a science background. Like anybody watching your film will really get the challenge. And I'm wondering, Bill, what inspired you to get involved? I assume you got a phone call and you had a lot of other things on your plate, although maybe some free time, having just gotten off our board.
Yeah, it was before I was still on the board.
There you go.
Right. Actually, I got a free lunch out of it. I was invited to lunch through a mutual friend who knew Barry and knew me, and said, "Well, you should, you guys should talk to each other." And so he invited me to lunch, and it was a 3-hour lunch. I mean, once we got started on this,
yep,
it just rolled. I mean, it was. I was able to just say, there's this kind of feedback, there's that kind of feedback, here's another example of feedback. And I think Barry's reaction was, I think we have more than enough to get this done. It really, the other thing is I've been teaching for well over 50 years now, and which I enjoy doing. In fact, I'm still doing it. I should have anyway, I'm still doing it. And one of the things that I realized from all that is that overwhelming people with highly technical information is not very useful. And so what I tried to work with this group on was, let these be commonsensical, accessible ideas from which people can draw their own conclusions. In other words, this is not buried in some mysterious computer model somewhere that says this is going to happen and that's going to happen. I mean, it just lays out there. Here's what's happening, and they had a wonderful way of visualizing it. And so that was we went back and forth on that, and I thought that was the real power of this and the whole series, is that it appeals to people's innate intelligence, understanding, experience.
Yeah.
And doesn't, can you remember what you did in a chemistry lab in high school or something? No, it's none of that, which I thought was really, really very impressive.
I would say that's the power of filmmaking, is that you can really tell a story that hits us both in our head and in our heart. And this really has done it. So really, congratulations. And Bonnie, there's one last question before we move to some of the audience questions. What's been the trajectory of this project? And can you share a little bit about how you've chosen to help out TNC with it?
I talked a little bit about the trajectory at the beginning, and that we started with the 5 short films. And as you and Bill pointed out, we wanted to make them very basic, very understandable to anyone. And so that was the start, because we thought more people would see them if they were free on a website, and more teachers would use them if we had a science curriculum and discussion guides. So we started out with that. And then as I mentioned, we developed this 1-hour broadcast film. And so we are simultaneously using the short films for education and the 1-hour film to sell to broadcasters around the world. And we have sold it all over the world, which is really exciting. All the proceeds from the sale of Earth Emergency are going to the Nature Conservancy. So that is how.
That's really wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
So yes, so that's that connection. So we hope for both of us that we'll have many more sales.
That's wonderful. And the kind of work that it supports, one of the things that the Nature Conservancy has done under our new CEO, Jen Morris, who's just amazing, is really focused. They did a really very broad thinking about the world analysis of where are those essential places to save right now that are at risk, that would have the greatest benefit for both climate change and biodiversity. And not surprising, the Amazon, is right in there. Boreal forest, thinking about the Appalachians, and then forests in Kenya, forests in Indonesia, critical places for climate change. And also, we lose it, we've lost so much biodiversity. And so we're doing some major fundraising, major focusing on what we can do in those landscapes to make the biggest difference, not in 10 years, today. We're really working hard on it. And so this film contributes in two ways. One is it gets the word out as to how important this work is. And then thank you for that other connection. Yeah. So going from thinking about the world to thinking about my living room, there's a bunch of questions here that about pellets. And so I remember, just like Alan Clark, one of the people who asked a question, and my guess is Peter Lawrence as well out there with his question. So we've got a few people asking about wood pellets. And I know when we got our pellet stove, we were doing it to get off oil, and that was supposed to be awesome and, you know, a great way to contribute. And I boasted about it when I was Secretary of the Environment up in Vermont, and as part of how green, you know, we were making our house. And now we see maybe it's more important to protect forests and switch to renewable energy. And Peter Lawrence asks, are there any leaders in the wood pellet industry who are taking this threat seriously as well? So can you say more about pellets? And maybe this is Bill. I know we've talked about this before. I confessed. I made the pellet stove confession to Bill in the past.
That's right. And we're still friends. It's okay.
I think it's still better than oil, but is it?
Yeah. Well, it's a first thing is it's better than burning logs because it burns cleaner and more efficiently. So even though there's process energy in there and emissions and so on, but it's for local air pollution, it's much better than burning logs, which is a great tradition in Vermont and New England anyway. You know, we pride ourselves on how many cords. I remember when during the energy crisis, we'd get these gatherings and everybody was shifting to wood. How many cords did you use? I used 3. Oh, I burned 5.
Right.
Wait a minute, you guys, we're going in the wrong direction here. But it's a really serious problem, and the big scale are, of course, these huge electric power stations, particularly in Europe, in the continent and in the UK, which are sourcing. There are not that many forests left in Europe,
right?
So getting the wood, they're burning it from elsewhere. So 60% of all the renewable energy in Europe is burning somebody else's wood.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I think in Massachusetts, we've taken a pretty strong stand against biomass, woody biomass for, especially for electricity. There was a terrible plant proposed out in Springfield, which thankfully has been nixed. And, you know, something people should know out there is when you burn wood, it's so inefficient, 3/4 of it goes right out into the air, the atmosphere. All that heat goes out. So it's just in its inefficiency, we're cutting down forests and only using 1/4 of it really for what our purpose is. So yeah, it's altogether bad.
Yep. Before we go to the questions, could I I'd like to just share something with everyone. In the last IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, a real breakthrough new perspective on how to think about climate change and the natural world. And this is a very short statement, and it just says, it's basically, it's a set of findings. Safeguarding biodiversity and ecosystems is fundamental to climate resilient development in light of the threats climate change poses to them and their roles in adaptation and mitigation. And they have in parentheses after that, very high confidence. And then they go on to say that this suggests that we need to conserve 30 to 50% of our land, our water, our oceans, and our near natural ecosystems. So, I mean, for the first time, climate scientists aren't just looking at the flow of carbon. They're looking at it in a much more comprehensive way, which is you're not going to get the flow of carbon if you don't have a biodiverse ecosystem called a forest or a wetland or a functioning grassland.
That's super important to think about. And of course, it sinks right into TNC's 2030 goals, but also the Biden administration's goals for 30%, conservation, which miraculously there's money to support. So, if people are looking for something to feel hopeful about, I think that is a good thing. We have a series of questions about what to do about our dependence on wood in so many ways. And one person asked, what materials should we use in place of wood if we're going to reduce or eliminate the use of wood for building products? Because of course, concrete is a huge emitter. They didn't say that, but I added that in. There's another, Michelle Gerard asks, yes, the forest feedback loop clip is both important and disturbing. It's confusing to consider how to use wood products more sustainably. And at the same time, wood construction products are considered more sustainable than concrete and steel. How can we as individuals influence markets and behaviors? Let me see if there's one more question about that. Well, that probably covers it. There might be somebody else with a tweak on that.
Well, there's a big push right now to replace all construction with these various forms of lumber that is manufactured. It is some of it's called cross-laminated timber and various other things. And they're building even 15, 16-story buildings with this now in Norway and in British Columbia and so on. Big push here in Massachusetts for that. We would, if we really did that, we would basically deplete our forests in a matter of a decade or two. And it's not as good as it sounds. First place, it takes a lot more wood to do it than to build a wood building as we build it today. Secondly, concrete manufacturers are not sleeping, and neither are steel manufacturers. There's a whole thing now called green steel, and the same with green concrete. And there's a concrete out now that reabsorbs 45% of the carbon dioxide. It was, so it's like a tree growing. So it's too simple. So the other thing is, wood doesn't last that long in a building. I mean, the average turnover of wooden buildings, homes in the United States they have a lifetime of 50 years. Whereas a concrete building, can last for a century or more. So you've got to take all that into account and not just get into a simplistic look. Finally, just so everybody knows, U.S. Forest Service did a study. What are the emissions associated with forestry? And 15% of them are the conversions and the fires and the insects. 85% are the emissions associated with harvesting.
Wow.
And that number is about equal to, there are two comparisons. One is it's about the same as the emissions, carbon dioxide emissions from all buildings in the United States, not counting the electricity, just the heating and so on.
Wow.
It's about the same as all the coal emissions in the United States. And that's every
I had not heard that before. That's a new one to me. And so I assume it's because they use diesel for all of their equipment, heavy equipment?
No, it's because, when you cut down a tree, I think it said in there, between half and 2/3 isn't used in the wood.
Oh, I see. So it's what's left but behind in the slash.
Well, or the slab wood or the sawdust, or none of that goes into a board. And so there's a huge amount of waste, and it's either left to decay. That's better than burning it, but a lot of it's burned in place of fossil fuels. Well, okay, there's some gain to be had there, I can see, but it's not a free good. It is really forestry is hugely carbon intensive, and so but often in the claims, we stored this much in that wood building. They don't tell you how much was emitted to do that, which is more than what was stored in the building.
So it's back to thinking about life cycle costs. So that's got to be embedded when we think about using wood. There had been a question about, doesn't the Forest Service know about this science? And it sounds like they're working on it. They're really looking at it. Now, are they acting on it? That's a different story.
They're not acting on it. That's the problem. They're not.
Yeah. Well, our board chair has a question. He says, great to see you again, Bill, and so nice to meet you, Bonnie. Is it possible to manage our working forests, for example, harvesting the smaller trees, but leaving the larger ones in order to actually increase carbon sequestration?
The answer to that is yes. It will not increase it as much as letting them all grow, but we are going to have working forests. We are going to have wood products, but you saw the pictures of how harvesting is done these days. This is no longer, Paul Bunyan with the axe on his shoulder and Baby's Blue Ox. This is big machines that go in and they can snip a 2-foot in diameter tree off like a pair of scissors and strip the bark and the branches off. You saw them doing that. And then all that part gets left behind, and then the logs are cut into perfect lengths to be sent to the sawmill. So it's that kind of harvesting is never going to accomplish that. And the other kind is more expensive to do. And so the question is, can we set the incentives so that we do that kind of in fact, in the Northeast, they're calling it, I think they're calling, in the Northwest, they call it ecological forestry.
Right.
And here in the East, they're calling it something else, like exemplary forestry. But not enough people are doing it. But let's keep working on it to get them to do it where they can.
Yeah. Yeah. So to that end, and I just got a little request for you to speak a little louder. Bill's mic is maybe a little far away.
Sure.
Betty Krikorian notes that many towns and cities and private property owners in Belmont, Newton, Boston, for example, are continuing to disregard the science, especially regarding the value of mature trees and woodlands. There seems to be no effective way to control private entities, including schools, or to persuade them to change their ways of operating. Have you seen anything? She asked for any suggestions, but I wonder if you've seen anything anywhere in the country that has been successful.
Yeah, I mean, people, just to give you an example, a colleague of mine, Bob Leverett, who measures trees, and we together calculate the carbon in them and so forth. A lot of towns, that 150-year-old tree, let's just cut it down. We're going to put a parking lot there. It doesn't matter. Don't worry, we'll plant another tree. Well, how many do you have to plant? So he gives the example. You've got a 100-foot tall red oak. It's probably 125 years old. And it holds 8 tons of carbon. So how many trees that are 50 feet tall do you have to equal that? You need 35. So planting a tree to replace it.
Yeah.
And a little one that's 25 feet tall, you need to plant 400 of those to have the same amount of carbon. So it's no contest, and yet we just treat our trees badly, and particularly in the urban areas, and it's just something to get out of the way. It's always in the way. Oh, that branch is going to fall, or this, or that, and the other thing. And rather than, this is really this amazing technology that's been doing this for 300 million years, and it's tried and true.
It's interesting. I remember as a kid how planting trees was such a big thing, and planting trees is important. We need to keep doing it, right? But it's not the answer to this problem. It's not the solution to
We
this
do
problem.
not have time for those trees to grow.
Yeah.
But let's keep doing it, because the people 75 or 100 years from now will be grateful.
Yes, that's right. So we have so many questions that we're not going to get to. Yes, Bonnie,
I
please.
just mentioned that there are some organizations in Massachusetts that are trying to save like urban trees that, are doing great work, like Speak for the Trees Boston, and save mass forests. So there are organizations that are focused specifically on trying to save local trees and forests.
And Mayor Wu has a big tree planting and protection,
Which is great.
Yeah, in Boston. Yeah.
During COVID, we saw the difference in health outcomes for the haves and the have-nots, meaning the people who had trees in their neighborhood versus the people who did not have trees in their neighborhood. So we know it has a public health impact, a quality of life impact, and it's an environmental justice issue, frankly, that it's our poor, underserved communities don't get the benefit, the cooling benefit and the shade benefit and just the aesthetic benefit. We know it helps our health just to see trees.
In Boston, they found a 10-degree difference in temperature in neighborhoods that have trees and those that do not.
Wow.
That's daytime and nighttime. So
So we're heading towards the end. We have a question from Stanley Lee. I wonder if this is a series or will there be a sequel? What comes next, Bonnie?
Well, yeah, right now, this is it. We have the 5 short films on the web and we have the 1-hour broadcast version. Nothing else is in the works as of now. Although we would love to do more. We would love to do follow-ups and focus more on solutions, but there's nothing in the works right now.
There was a question about that too. It's like, could you do a film that shows what the world could look like if we do it right, if we do it wrong? And, I think that's probably a hard film to make, but.
Well, feel free to get in touch with me if you're interested. So.
Yeah,
So I want to apologize to everybody who put questions in that we didn't get to. There's a lot here. Let me just note that Michelle Gerard noted that many municipalities are developing tree canopy retention bylaws and ordinances. So there's stuff happening. Sharon Levinson asked about where the quote on safeguarding the need to conserve 30 to 50% of nature, and that's the IPCC report. It's the United Nations United Nations report, and perhaps we'll be able to.
I can send you the link to that.
We'll follow up with a link. There's a note that people in Mattapan are trying to save Crane Ledge Woods. They've got a coalition with lots of information on their website, and there's that people want to know also, Bonnie, where they can see the 1-hour version of your film.
Yeah, so if you're a PBS Passport member, you should be able to watch it for free through Passport, but you can also rent it on iTunes for $2.99.
Any final thoughts from either of you before we come to the end today?
I'd like to add that if anyone is interested in doing a kind of, webinar around our films, or have us plan a panel like this to your community groups or schools, please contact us through our website, because we're doing a lot of outreach like this.
I just close by saying, to me, the wonderful thing about the natural world is it gives us hope that we could actually really address climate change, because we know where we are and we know where we could be. And it shouldn't be that difficult to get there if we all just agree that we do need to protect forests, our wetlands, our grasslands, and to work with farmers who are trying to develop more carbon building soil practices. There's just so much that can be done, and those all make an impact now. And will continue, and it gets amplified over time with a positive feedback loop that is the right side.
Thank you for ending us in such a positive, hopeful way. I want to just thank you both so much. And I want to thank you, Bonnie, for your generous contributions to TNC as part of the proceeds from the film come to us. It really means a lot to us in our work. And I want to thank you to everyone who's tuned in today for your support of the Nature Conservancy. It is your support that makes all of this work possible. We're going to be sending everyone a follow-up email over the coming days that will have links to the resources we talked about today, as well as a recording of the webinar. So if you have enjoyed this and you have family or friends who you think might have enjoyed coming to the webinar and didn't make it on, you're welcome to forward it to them. Note that you can also follow us on social media at conserve_MA on Facebook and Instagram. That's a good way to keep up with our work and to get updates on upcoming virtual opportunities to connect with us. And I noted that this was not on our Facebook page. We meant it to be on and missed that. Stay tuned for more webinars in October, including a visit to Florida and a presentation from our very own Andy Fitton and Rennie Wendell about the onset of fall and winter and how ecosystems and wildlife get ready for a change of season. We'll be sending out more information about those soon, and you can stay updated with nature.org/MA webinars. So Bonnie, Bill, thank you again. You're awesome. Really a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you for having us.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.